Have you ever wondered what feelings are good for? I certainly have, especially in the times of my life when I found myself completely overwhelmed. Turns out that I wasn't really satisfied with the answers I was finding in the self-help books or the psychology books that I got my hands on. So I decided to find out what feelings are actually all about and ended up writing a book about it. To be honest, I never thought it would be such a huge success. But here I am, almost 10 years later, still talking about it. People continue to write to me about that book, telling me how it's changed their lives, how there's so many answers in there that they really wish they'd had earlier. First thing I discovered when I started to look into the subject of feelings is that we use the term feelings in a really vague way. So the first thing I did as I started to investigate feelings was that I went in there and I started to make some distinctions, because how can we really have a clear conversation about something when the terminology is really foggy? So I allowed myself to define 5 categories of sensations, which I want to go into briefly because we need that as a foundation to be super clear about what we're talking about when we're saying feeling. The first category is physical sensations. Now this is your classical sensations, something touches you, something feels hot or cold. That's the first category, physical sensations. The second category is the category of biological programs. Now biological programs is what many people would call instincts. However, I count into the category of biological programs also things such as falling in love, motherly love, greed, biological fear, biological anger, aggression, fight and flight. These kinds of things, for me, are all in the biological programs category. It's important to distinguish the biological programs from the feelings, which I'll be talking about in a moment, because they're actually produced in a completely different way. They're actually wired differently in our brain. Now, the purpose of biological programs is very different than the purpose of feelings. Biological programs are designed to make us survive. They're not intended to make us particularly nice or particularly good at having relationships, which explains why we sometimes have a really hard time with them. The third category is what I actually call feelings. Feelings are social powers. In my understanding, this category of feelings developed later than the biological programs. They developed when we started to live together in groups and started to interact in a more complex way socially. So these feelings, in contrast to the biological programs, are actually triggered by our thoughts. They are produced by our interpretations of our environment. In this category, I attribute 5 basic feelings: anger, sadness, shame, fear, and joy. And most of this talk will actually be about these 5 basic feelings, which together form the emotional compass, and together enable us to navigate any situation that we might confront in our relationships, in our lives, professionally and privately. But back to the 5 categories of feelings. We talked about physical sensations, biological programs, and feelings of social powers. The fourth category is the category of what I call emotions. Now, I use the term emotions differently than most people. I use the term emotions to denote emotional baggage, feelings which we were overwhelmed with in the past, hence we couldn't feel them, and hence they went into emotional baggage. And the reason why feelings often have such a bad reputation is because we mix them up with emotions. Emotions can be really challenging. They can really damage our relationships big time, and they can make it very, very hard for us to be the people we want to be. When our emotional baggage gets activated, we become somebody else and we do things that normally we would never do. The 5th category is what I call abilities or states of consciousness. This is a category that we're still in the process of developing. For example, the ability to love. Now, here I'm not talking about falling in love, which is a biological program. I'm talking about love as an ability. And love as an ability is something that we all potentially can develop. yet it doesn't happen automatically. Now, even if I have developed my ability to love to some extent, it doesn't mean that I'm always in a state of love, because love is a state of consciousness, and sometimes I'm in that state and sometimes I'm not. Other examples of states of consciousness or abilities in my understanding are trust or gratitude. So now that I've distinguished these 5 categories of sensations, I want to zoom in on the third category, the feelings as social powers. As I mentioned before, there's 5 basic feelings that I attribute here. And together they form what I call the emotional compass. The emotional compass has 4 feelings in the 4 directions that are directed outwards. These feelings are anger, sadness, fear, and joy. The 5th feeling, shame, is located in the center of the compass, and we'll talk about why that is the case in a moment. When I first talk about the 5 basic feelings, anger, sadness, shame, fear, and joy, most people say, wait a minute, something's majorly wrong here. How can we have 5 basic feelings, 4 of which we really don't want to have? If we take a closer look at feelings, we understand that the one positive feeling in the emotional compass, joy, comes up when what we would like and what is match. So there's no gap between the two. When that happens, we look at what is and we say, yay, this is great, this is awesome, I love it, and we create joy. Remember, feelings are created through interpretations. Now, the other 4 feelings, anger, sadness, shame, fear, they come up whenever there's a gap between what we would like and what is. And this gap is commonly referred to as pain. Now, of course, we don't want to have it. It's a fact of life that we are continuously confronted with situations that are different than we would like them to be. The 4 so-called negative feelings in the emotional compass are our equipment that enable us to deal appropriately with these situations. And because the situation of having a gap between what we would like and what is more challenging than when the 2 match, we need a larger vocabulary to address those situations. Okay, so let's get in there. Starting with the first feeling in the compass, anger. The power of anger, as I like to call it, is a great feeling. It allows us to take a stand and get moving. And it helps us to deal with this gap between what is and what we would like by closing it, by saying, hey, something's not working here, let's do something about it. There are many situations in our lives where we just need to get moving and we need to do something about a situation. That's the power of anger. Now, of course, anger also has a shadow expression. All the feelings have a shadow expression. And the shadow expression of anger is destruction. Now, anger is a really great feeling to have when you're confronted with a situation that you can actually do something about. It's not the right feeling when you're confronted with a situation that you can do nothing about. Anger gets you all powered up, ready to go. And when we're confronted with a situation we cannot change, we need a different feeling. We actually need sadness. Sadness has a very different effect on our system. It calms us, it relaxes us, it even soothes us, and it helps us to accept that which we cannot change, even though we would so much like it to be different. And if we go really deep, sadness is actually the power which opens our hearts and deepens our ability to love, so that we become able to accept that which we couldn't accept before. Also, sadness has a shadow expression, passivity, where we become victims of the situation. We don't engage with anything. We believe there's nothing we can do. We become depressed. Now, we've talked about anger as a great power to change things, and we've talked about sadness as a great power to accept things. However, there are situations in life which we can neither change nor accept. And this is where we need the third feeling in the compass, which is fear. Now, fear is a feeling that many people have a really hard time understanding as a power. That's because most people only know fear and its shadow expression, which is paralysis. However, this paralysis that many people experience when they are afraid is actually the fear of the fear. It's actually an effort not to feel the fear. Superficially can look very similar to the passivity that is the shadow expression of sadness. However, there's a really important difference. The passivity of sadness is a deeply relaxed state. It's limp. The paralysis of fear is actually really tense. It's a highly energetic state. When we learn to relax into the feeling of fear, it reveals itself as a power. It reveals itself as a highly energetic state that enables us to meet the unknown. Now, many people think that fear is about danger. They believe that when they're afraid, it means that something dangerous is there. That's not true. That's a misconception. Fear comes up whenever we're about to meet the unknown. Now, that unknown might be dangerous, or it might just be unknown. Now, one thing that many people can relate to is this feeling that they have before going up on stage, before a big show. There can be this intense excitement or even terror. And even very experienced artists or speakers will tell you that they know, hey, when this feeling is present, they know it's going to be good. Well, that's the power of fear right there. So that was the third feeling in the compass. Let's move on to the fourth feeling, which is the feeling of joy, our favorite feeling. And I already talked about the fact that this is because joy shows up when that which we want matches that which is. And then we say, yes, great, awesome, I love it, and we create joy. Many people miss that opportunity. They miss that moment to say, hey, wow, this is great, thank you, life. And then they miss an opportunity to create joy. What might surprise you is that joy also has a shadow expression, just like the other feelings. In the case of joy, this is illusion. This is where we fool ourselves into believing that something is really great and we're loving it when actually we're not. This is where people fool themselves into believing that they're having a great relationship, or that they have a happy family, or that they love their job, or whatever. There's many areas where people fall into illusions and then they find themselves in the shadow expression of joy. Okay, so these are the four feelings on the outside of the compass. And then it's time to look into the middle of the compass, where we find the feeling of shame. The power of shame is that moment of heat, of just wanting to disappear, of becoming so acutely aware of yourself and all your flaws and discrepancies. Well, believe it or not, that's super important. If you're not able to feel shame, you're not able to see yourself from the outside. Now, that's not to say that also shame doesn't have a shadow expression. Of course it does. This is where it becomes really self-destructive and we lose ourselves in endless self-criticism, even self-abnegation. But the power of shame is not to be underestimated. It's just as important as the power of the other feelings. Without shame, we're unable to check in with who we are and whether we're actually living up to our values, whether we are who we want to be. And then once we've had that moment of self-reflection, because that's what the power of shame is about, we can apply any of the other feeling powers to ourselves. Sometimes it is time to just get angry with ourselves and say, come on, can't you pull yourself together? Go out and work out. And sometimes it's time to just open our hearts and say, you know what, I really wish this was different about me, and I love myself anyway. Or we can celebrate aspects of ourselves that other people might not really like, but we say, hey, you know what, I think this is great. Or some parts we actually might need to confront with the power of fear, where we're meeting parts in ourselves that we just don't know, and we don't know what's going to happen when we allow them to fully emerge. So that's the emotional compass. 4 feelings pointing out, 1 feeling to see ourselves. Anger to change what you need to change, sadness to accept what you need to accept, fear to confront the unknown, joy to celebrate what you love, and shame to question yourself.